Nice full screen.
I got an itch in my ear. Give me a second.
Been to any foreign countries recently? I hear they've got some parasites that might jump in your ear canal.
Please, I've never left.
Brain-eating amoebas.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard of that though in North Carolina, where like there's like these
and
rivers.
Lake Norman.
Yeah, it's terrifying. This is why I don't like lakes.
Stay away from lakes.
I like the beach more. I'm a much more of a beach person.
It can happen there too.
I could do without either.
Florida, 2 years ago, I think, had like a flesh-eating bacteria that was in the water and on the beaches. It's something that happens when the temperature stays too warm for too long. It basically allows like these crazy bacteria or things to grow. Like that's what happened to Lake Norman. The water was too warm for too long, and some weird sort of brain-eating. What was it exactly? Because that kid died from it.
Amoeba? I don't know.
I mean, the kid like died in 24 hours though after inhaling.
I went super dark. I was gonna make the joke about the water turning the frogs gay.
It's like I was gonna go a little different.
Maybe that's a possibility too. it is a Duke Energy lake. So
speaking of the frogs being gay, how about Obama being gay?
yeah. That's a thing. Oh my goodness.
Speaking of gay, let's talk. I'm just going to keep making these horrible transitions.
That would have been a great precursor, though.
No. Well, I'll maybe circle back to it. But I'll welcome our viewers to another episode, blah, blah, blah. So glad you're here. We have with us once again John Colclough, one of our contributors, and he did Weird Wide Web Wars, which was honestly a fairly comprehensive view of how the internet really changed politics in America. And it was a really fun conversation. And since he's written some good spicy articles for us, thought we'd have him back to talk about a broad topic. Well, slightly broad, but I think John's going to kind of break it down. Yeah. In regards to, which was related to my lead-in of being gay. Trans.
It's a letter.
The trans stuff. That is
the trans stuff.
There's a lot of trans stuff. So, John, take it away. We're ready.
Okay, so sort of just to set the stage, and I will say that we recorded this episode already and we're redoing it for technical reasons, but I'm actually kind of glad we are, because maybe it'll come across a little more articulate. But we'll see. So, but yeah, I wanted to talk about the condition first. And by the condition, there are multiple things that people think of when they hear the word trans. First thing you do is freeze and get scared because you're like, where's this conversation gonna go? What's this person gonna say, and am I gonna get canceled? That's the first thing that pops into a lot of people's heads. But on a serious note, as far as the actual quote unquote condition goes, I suppose, it was originally attributed to gender dysphoria. And gender dysphoria used to be classified as a mental disorder or medical condition as defined in the DSM-5. If you look it up today, it'll say something like, oh, they don't identify with their assigned gender at birth. But initially it was saying that people who do not quite feel at home within their body as far as the sex they were born as. That's the general sentiment, because I can't find a precise description anymore of what it was, but initially it was, I am not comfortable that I'm in a male's body, or I am not comfortable that I am in a female's body. Before I get into the nitty-gritty, I'll go into what is not gender dysphoria, because gender dysphoria, and what we know is, I guess, quote-unquote, the trans stuff, or transsexuals are typically, or were typically, diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and they would make the choice whether or not to, I guess there are multiple ways you could sort of deal with it or live with it, but some people would choose to try and pass as the opposite sex to alleviate their dysphoria. That's just a general idea of what the classic term for trans was. And I'll use the word transsexual because I think it's probably the most accurate term, because gender is now this fun, bendy thing that I mean, it's not, but
Yeah.
word-wise, it's very difficult to deal with. But how about what's not gender dysphoria? Something that is often thrown into the mix, and it perfectly plays into where people start to get victimized, for lack of better terms, is a lot of the time people tend to mix it together with body dysmorphia. They don't realize that these are two separate conditions. Gender dysphoria has to do with the way that someone feels about being in a masculine or feminine body. However, well, I guess that's not a great description considering body dysmorphia. Body dysmorphia is commonly experienced by especially girls going through puberty. And obviously, I'm not a girl. I can't speak to that, what that's actually like. I know Jordan can. But it's an experience in which kids, and it's not just kids, there are a lot of people from a lot of different walks in life and at different points in their life that may experience body dysmorphia for a number of reasons. But I think part of the reason we've seen a huge uptick with youth, especially, is when they become uncomfortable with their body and the changes happening to them, they feel like they may have a sense of control because of this thing that's become that's a quick run on body dysmorphia. Now, another thing that is not transgenderism or not a transsexual would be autogynephilia. And autogynephilia is a sexual fetish in the form of euphoria derived from being perceived as female. And I suppose it can go the other way around, but it's most typically males that, for lack of better terms, gets off on being perceived as female, especially in vulnerable situations or gaining access to women's spaces. And then we have gender ideology, which is sort of all encompassing, and it's how we get the I don't have there's no technical term for any of it. You've got neopronouns, you've got otherkin, you've got non-binary, two-spirit. That's basically where all the fun stuff falls into that doesn't fit in the transsexual category, which is actually used to be way smaller than it is now. But yeah, that's the set of it.
This is interesting. I'm glad that we're having this conversation because, you know, we kind of, before we even started this episode, we kind of entitled it trans stuff. And I think as you're going to continue to get into, like, it's very broad and it's very overwhelming because when someone says trans, I don't think they understand all the different nuances of what's been lumped into that. And so from what at least, and I'm coming more from the female perspective of body dysmorphia, I think that one to me is incredibly important because one, when we're seeing what we're seeing a lot of, and I at least that's what I feel is what I think I'm seeing is that there's a lot of girls that are going to these clinics and, you know, trying to be a boy, so to speak, because there is some sort of discomfort in their body. And it might not even be body dysmorphia, by the way. I think there are these...
It can be other things as well.
Well, yeah. And I think, too, we had talked about this in a previous episode, where every girl goes through being uncomfortable in their body. Being a young teenager as a girl is incredibly uncomfortable, and you feel really insecure. Pile that on top of, you know, whatever family dynamics are going on at home. You might not even have body dysmorphia. You just might have a really dysfunctional lifestyle with no solid parent figure. So I was just want to put that out there. And another thing too, and then I'll let you keep going. I almost lost my thought there. This is what it is. People have this idea that everyone is so specific and individual. You are so special. You are so unique. Yet at the same time, they're equally willing to lump in a bunch of very serious conditions into one thing as serious as body mutilation, whether it be through physical mutilation or through chemical castration. And so I just find that really disturbing that and I've kind of used this phrase a lot today, talk out two sides of their mouth. You're super unique, but if you have any issues with your body, probably trans, take the estrogen, take the testosterone. That's just kind of mind-boggling to me.
It is. It really is. Yeah. So language, I think that's a great place to start, because you were talking about how a lot of people, especially young girls, fall susceptible to something like this. And I'm sort of using that as an in, because I think a huge part of what has made this a monster out of control is the rise of stuff like TikTok. I mean, social media was already a thing, but there's been a sort of wave of self-identification over the past few years. And by that, I don't just mean people saying, hey, call me this because that's what I want to be called. It also plays into self-diagnosis. When people gain this status of, I'm getting, I don't want to get hung up on that point. So I actually want to talk about groups that are targeted by the greater issue, I suppose, the greater issue at hand. And I think the greater issue at hand, for one, is the ability to have the conversation, because when you hear trans, usually it's pro-trans or anti-trans. That's usually all that people think. But there are a lot of ways to have this conversation that can avert a lot of the chaos that typically ensues. But yeah, first, to address targeted groups. And the number one group, as you could probably guess, is women. Women obviously have to, they have to deal with sharing their spaces in, probably in, is it fair to call like the Leah Thomas situation an extreme situation?
I think it's becoming less extreme. It's becoming, that's the issue. That's what we're kind of addressing, is that it's becoming less and less uncommon for places to allow men to share in these spaces because of gender ideology.
Yes. Yeah, I think one of the first ones was Fallon Fox in the MMA, and then we had Leah Thomas, and now it's a pretty regular occurrence on my news feed at this point.
Yeah, it's this concept of normalization, trying to make these things seem more common than they are, and especially to younger people, because it's something that's easy to grab onto. There's this term that was pretty popular back in the typical classic SJW days, and that was transgenders. It was people who realized that this was going to become a protected class, and they would love to be trans and find their way in, which leads to our next victim class, which would be people with autism. It has been found a lot of people who have been allegedly diagnosed with gender dysphoria have been later diagnosed with autism. And another thing is, a lot of kids especially tend to script. It's how a lot of children, I say children, I mean even up to adolescents, a lot of the way that we learn even as human beings is by scripting, I suppose, sort of like by copying what we've seen. And I think it becomes easier to sort of, while you're finding your identity, to try and fall into one of these categories. And I don't want to speak too much to people who have autism. I do not have autism. I'm not super close to anyone who has autism, but I do know that there has been a heavy trend in the data between people who have been identified as trans, whether or not because they don't always associate gender dysphoria with quote unquote being trans. So essentially, these people who happen to have autism, who are pulled into the LGBT plus community, and that puts them at risk.
Which institutions are tracking this?
Not any of the ones that should be. But yeah, like it's really hard to say now where, and this isn't me deflecting, it's really hard to be able to tell where to get accurate data now, because I feel like the best information that comes out is from the sources they tell you not to listen to. Like the most valuable information about any of this that has come out from Matt Walsh's channel. And of course, like, he is the type of person who people for the most part love or hate. But in general, it's very difficult to nail down exactly what is going on a medical level, because the institutions are corrupt.
So
And I hate
Matt
saying that
Walsh,
in such a book.
his team's internally tracking this, or they've taken up the work
Yeah.
to track these cases. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, which is pretty significant.
It's a big undertaking to
Yeah.
do something like that.
Yeah, I think there was actually we had actually talked about this in the last episode. Jordan Peterson and Chloe Cole, who's become one of the front runners for detransitioning, and she also, similar to what you said, is a case story of discovering that she had like a high functioning level of autism. Again, just going back to that point of, oh, you're so unique, but also everybody's trans. It's like, it's kind of interesting. We were joking about the frogs being gay, but it almost feels like the joke is now, the frogs are trans. Like everyone's like, you're trans, we're all trans.
I was literally about to mention this. I was literally going to mention this, and I chose not to, but now I'm going to choose to just because it happens to be relevant. Actually, I'm not going to bring it up here because I don't want to like.
I'm thinking of a line from a movie.
Remember, you're anonymous, so.
Well, yeah. I just didn't want to like derail everything. Okay, but essentially, I found. I hate saying stuff that's like, no, this isn't a person from person thing. Alex Jones, he got to clarify to someone what the meme came from, because it's kind of the meme that we got of him being like, oh, the chemicals in the water are turning frogs gay.
Yeah.
He was having a conversation. It may have been with Clayton Morris from the Redacted channel. Clayton and Natalie Morris have their own YouTube Rumble show called Redacted, where they also cover news that doesn't commonly get covered in the media. And I believe he said it was him who was talking to Alex Jones at an event a few years ago, and he was talking about how what he was talking about in that segment was how certain chemical, whatever scenario he was talking about, chemicals in the water were biologically changing the frogs to where they would become reproducing females. And that was a shocking revelation to hear. It's not something I've dug into a ton, but that is apparently where it came from. And he's a very theatrical person. I'm not an Alex Jones fan. I'm not like, oh yeah, let's go Alex Jones. Yeah. So I'm not like endorsing everything under the sun. I just heard it recently, and I was like, oh, that's actually very interesting.
Yeah,
I think if I remember that one right, and I had to look up the term to make sure it was the right definition or I had the right word, I think the frogs were technically becoming hermaphrodites, so they were having both like female and male sexual like reproduction organs. Like, it was really weird. Really weird pollution going on, and I forgot what the company was or what the building was that was dumping into the river, but it was definitely messing up the frogs.
Interesting.
Very weird scenario.
But the movie line,
sorry for the derailment.
No, you're good. The movie line that I was thinking of when you guys were talking about like, everything is trans or everybody is something at this point, because I do feel like there was this idea that was sold to our generation that everybody's special or has something to offer, and then you grow up and you find out maybe you're probably not that special. But it makes me think of The Incredibles with Syndrome saying, once everybody's super, then nobody will be. As his goal was to bring everybody up to that level. It feels like it's going to be the same. It's going to be the same thing. At some point, you're protected class. If you protect everybody, you're not a protected class anymore. You've just umbrellaed the entire population.
If you're so inclusive that it's everybody, then it's not really that special anymore. You're all just freaks together.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, you're just normal. You don't even got to be a freak.
All right, keep going.
So, ironically, another target group, I would say, of I want to define what I say when I say targeted, like what they're being targeted by. I would like to say the pharmaceutical industry. I would say people who would like to have access to women, have access to children, and in a former society, in former iterations of our society, these things just wouldn't be happening. There are a lot of scenarios that are able to come from these unique situations that would not be happening before, and in the name of inclusion are happening today. So just know that's sort of what I mean to speak to when I'm saying, oh, these groups are being targeted. I'll talk about who's targeting them later. But anyway, pubescent youth, we've sort of already addressed that. They tend to sort of fall victim to this sort of thing. Ironically, homosexuals. Homosexuals often fall victim to gender ideology, largely because, I mean, obviously, if you're a feminine male or masculine female, you're more likely to, especially if you come from a more religious background or even traditional in any sense. It's not like homosexuality is the most common thing. It's not like every other person who is born happens to be homosexual. So there are a lot of cases in which people feel like, oh, okay, well, I might as well. I don't want to trivialize it. I'm just saying that because I have it written down. And yeah, I had feminine males, masculine females. The mentally ill, we kind of already addressed that. And I think ultimately what's sort of keeping this whole thing together is overly affirming individuals. I would say, honestly, even with the nefarious forces you can say are behind the scenes, take them out of the picture. I think the reason that this problem is perpetuated is because of individuals who happen to be very open-minded, probably good-intentioned, who probably don't think that it's as common as that it's as common as it actually is for people to have their lives ruined over these sorts of situations. There are no long-term studies that show the results of what it's like to go through the sort of channels that we have now, where you can easily gain access to hormones. And they say that you have to go through intense therapy, you have to get a prescription, and most people are able to call in and get it pretty easily.
Yeah, it's not well, you know, the gatekeeping on it is really, really poor.
Yeah.
Question for you on the over affirming individuals. I feel like, I don't know, well, I said I was going to ask you a question, but it's going to be more of a statement that I want you to react to. I feel like it's not just over affirming individuals. I feel like I think there was a small amount of affirming individuals, and then there was a group of fearful people that, you know, through society being like, you know, if you say trans or, you know, you don't agree with it, then you're a bad person. Where some have morphed, have almost kind of like joined in with the over affirming people to save themselves. Like, I think that the over affirming people are much smaller than we think. And actually there's more of them that are in fear.
There's been sort of this like blackmail, because there are a lot of cases we've heard in which the parents are faced with the question, do you want a live son or a dead daughter?
Yeah, what
that's Chloe Cole's story, isn't it? Yeah.
There's something, it kind of reminds me of like join or die. You know, that's kind of the idea, like join or die. And they're like, okay, we're going to join and we will mimic everything that you want. And then you kind of start to, because it's kind of uncomfortable, but you start to convince yourself it's not that bad. Like you're doing the right thing.
And it's genuinely the glue that keeps together the whole machine, because this isn't a model that holds water. And I just described multiple different groups of people who really are going through their very own experiences that are typically pretty distinct from one another. They should not all be falling under this same umbrella, yet they do, because in the grand scheme of things, it helps them be more of a protected class. And I'm not just saying that in the, oh, they get all the privilege in the world, even though that is sort of the way it is now. They don't see it that way because of the history that it seems that from their perspective, basically, that it's had of being so taboo. And
you know what, I'm going to interrupt you. You know what that reminds me of? You know what history, this is just me, pure conjecture and just no evidence behind this really. But I feel like they use the LG part to justify the quote unquote suffering of trans, if that makes sense. Because because with homosexuals, like they're definitely, there's less of a taboo now, but there was definitely a taboo with it at one point. And so they piggyback off of that in regards to being trans, so to speak.
That's a perfect point as well, because someone who doesn't know better as well, and remember, gay marriage was only legalized in 2015. That's a pretty recent revelation that our country decided to do. We decided to redefine marriage, especially for kids. They don't know any different. And so they're thinking, oh, well, gay people just now got their rights. When are trans people going to get their rights? However, I'll pose the question to you. What rights do gay or trans people have that you or I have right now?
Like, what rights do they have that we don't have?
No, vice versa. Like they believe that they don't have rights that we have. What rights would you think those might be?
You know, I really can't think of anything.
I mean, at this point, since 2015, there's nothing that I can think of, because marriage was the big one, right?
Yeah,
being able to get married and have each other on your partner's healthcare, and benefits and all of that stuff.
There's the word healthcare. What they want to do, when I say that the movement, the purpose of the political part of the movement is to get insurance providers to include cosmetic surgery in their insurance plans, because I believe that helps feed the pipeline, the medical pipeline of the transgender phenomenon.
You know, and that makes a lot of sense, just because at least some of the arguments that I heard that are fairly sympathetic arguments of homosexuals that are in, you know, relationships, and one of them has to go to the hospital or something happens, like, you know, who, like, can that partner actually be there for them, like things of that nature. And so something that that a reasonable person could maybe flex on there, like you said, there is an opportunity to kind of take it to its extreme in regards to insurance. So
so this is actually a good time to address who I would call the predators in the situation. That would be MAPS. I know we talked some about them.
You mean pedophiles?
Pedophiles, minor attracted people. We have our own flag. We're joining the LGBTQIA
It's such a smart move, though. If you're a pedophile, like, why not join that to become a protected class? So sick.
It has been a movement for probably like the past 10-ish years, but at least just in the past 5 years, they have been able to make a lot of motion towards joining this acronym that keeps getting longer and longer. And I know it's a meme. It really is a meme. Like, I hate being like, oh, it's all such a stupid joke, but I try and treat it seriously when I can, because obviously to these people, it's their lives. Like, they're under attack. They're going to be thrown in the gas chambers, even though, like, that doesn't make any sense. They act like there's this mass genocide happening, and they have to be believing for some reason. There has to be a reason that they believe that. And so I think it's important to figure out how to have these conversations and the multiple angles you can come from, because a lot of these people are especially youth. They're young people who didn't know anything different. They think this is the biggest existential threat of all time, because this generation is the most heavily identifying in terms of, I hate using the term, like, queerness, you know, which used to be a slur.
Yeah.
Queer used to be a slur you definitely don't say to people.
Gay used to be a slur too.
Gay used to be a slur as well. But yeah, I'm not going to get hung up on that. Next group of people who I would say are predators are men with the fetish, autogynephilia, who get pleasure out of dressing up as a woman, out of accessing women's spaces, and gaining access to children. And you can talk about the innocuous parts of it, as in, say that there is a man who happens to pass very well as a woman and use the bathroom, but there's that situation versus a situation in which someone does not pass at all, and they're able to walk in and out of somewhere and make a hubbub out of it, or make it so that you do not want to be the one to cause a hubbub out of what is potentially a dangerous situation. And we've seen a lot of those sorts of things play out in schools and such. We've got male athletic competitors, already mentioned Will Thomas. And we have sex researchers, which I'm sure you're familiar with. The main ones people are now familiar with being John Money, Alfred Kinsey. Kinsey, who has his very own research institute.
Which is insane.
I pulled up the About Us and the history portion on their website, and it's just amazing how great they talk about him. He had horrible experiments and ruined people's lives.
They contribute to a mass amount of sexual research today. And Kinsey's, it's not his claim to fame, but some of the fundamentals of his research was not just, it wasn't just interviewing people who happened to be in these very extreme situations. It was oftentimes prisoners who were convicted of very nefarious acts. I don't want to get you guys demonetized on where this is going.
Was he the one that wrote the book, trying to prove? I'm trying to remember what it was, but he used the population of prisoners to try to prove some sort of sexual.
Yes, I believe that's him.
Okay.
He is the one who had a graph in said book of the orgasms of babies. Yes, not just children, but going all the way down to a granular level, and it's pretty disgusting. That's Kinsey's legacy. However, it's drowned out by all the love and the opportunity for moving forward the LGBT community today. It's not something people think of. They sort of think of it in the rear view. And if you're bring up something like that, typically people are inclined to say, well, don't you know the Catholics are pedophiles as well?
Well, there's something before you move forward. I do want to point something out that I think is really important. And that is with Alfred Kinsey, that even when you talk to conservatives about Alfred Kinsey, it's more of he created this ideology and that's what lives on today. And now he's completely disgraced and he's terrible. But when you bring up this institute and how much they back research on how it's still funded, I think that's a really important thing to point out to people, that his legacy is much deeper than just the ideology and what he did. It's still living on in a university that's continuing, or institute, that's continuing his work. And I don't hear that get brought up at all, really, by any conservatives. So I just think it's a really good point.
And the Kinsey Institute, it is either part or it is directly affiliated with the University of Indiana. So they have a very close relationship with I would say just a regular college. I can't think of a better term than your kids
just
could
an
casually go to this
academic
college and
higher education.
And then there's trans activists. Sorry, I keep looking down the paper because I'm
no, I kind of keep taking you off your path, but
it's perfect though.
And I don't mean to derail you, but I was like, no, this is really important.
No,
I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, I think out of anything, we talked about how probably the greatest victims, well, I don't know if the greatest victims, but the glue that keeps the sandwich together as far as victims go is overly affirming people, super defensive people, maybe people even blinded by love for the people they care about and can't see past the existential threat that they think is there. And then as far as the actual threat, as far as the reach of predators, I would say the trans activists are the front line of what has become one of the most aggressive, I'll use the term hate campaign, one of the most aggressive hate campaigns to this day. There is not a more hateful, nonetheless effective political group. There's not one more effective than the modern trans activist today.
Are you
I think,
are you drawing a distinction between trans activists and transgender people in general?
yes, absolutely. Well, obviously, it's not always the case because there are definitely some people like I hate to think off the top of my head. Alejandra Caraballo.
Oh, never
She
heard.
is a yeah. If you looked her up, you'd know. But she is a transgender. I don't remember if it's male to male, female to female. Doesn't matter. But um, a transgender person who is an activist, a trans activist, and
What was the last name?
Caraballo. I couldn't tell you how to spell it right now.
I think also Dylan Mulvaney would probably fall into that category.
Dylan Mulvaney doesn't count, and I'll tell you exactly why.
Okay.
Dylan Mulvaney is not trans. And another thing I want to sort of lay out here, I would say that trans as it used to exist before it was cool, I would identify those people as transsexuals, people who wanted to live as and pass as the opposite sex. It's not a thing that was in our normal day-to-day life. It's not something you thought about. And then you have transgender. I would say that transgender is the phenomenon. I would say it's the phenomenon of people who maybe even believe that they are transgender, but they believe in more self-identifying than just going about their life and leaving you alone. And then the third category, transgender, and that's Dylan Mulvaney is the face of the transtrenders. I don't believe he is even attempting to come off as a woman. I think that he genuinely gets the most out of the fact that he gets tons of attention and can say and do whatever, like worshiping the bulge, and that he will still get support because that's how crazy the world is right now.
So
he's playing a...
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so a transsexual would be like Blair White. That would be...
I would say so.
And someone who's transgender is, I'd say, one of these like, college kids that, they think they're, and they haven't really done any like surgeries, but they kind of somewhat present themselves in an androgynous manner, or that's if you're non-binary, but or
subscribe to the ideology.
But they just more believe that if I believe it in my heart, then my outside appearance. I would say so. Okay, I think that's it. I think those are actually helpful categories overall. Okay, continue.
Yeah, I would say, and Dylan Mulvaney is a perfect in as well, because I say that there are multiple ways to slice these different groups, but even just those three distinctions, an example for each one, and by example, I mean an example of how they can be addressed. Someone like Blair White, transsexual, or Buck Angel, they will talk to you about this issue. They will be able to sit down and have a conversation, talk about where you agree, where you disagree. They may be left-wing, they may be right-wing, but most of all, they're typically prepared to have a conversation with you. They recognize it as a medical condition, a mental disorder, whatever, that they are open to where this may have originated. You get transgender, this is where gender becomes a spectrum, and it's territory where anything's possible. Sky can be red, grass can be blue, and I'd say it could be hit or miss because you could call someone like either of those people transgender, but I've heard them mention that they want to refer themselves as transsexual in case it helps to start making a distinction. And you don't know what you're going to get when, like, just with the general transgender community, and when anyone says transgender, it's, for lack of better terms, what we think of when we think the trans stuff. Mm-hmm. If someone says the word transgender to you, okay, this is going one in a million different directions. And then as far as transgenders go, maybe that just needs to be brought back as a term, because Dylan Mulvaney, perfect example of someone who realized that he could gain wealth, status, and access just from impersonate, and it's not that he's the only one who's I guess impersonating women. I don't feel like that's the best word, but sort of wearing it as a dress. And you could argue that all of this is about wearing the opposite sex as an outfit because you can't actually be that thing. But it's another reason that I say transsexuals more likely to talk to you. They will say, yeah, I am wearing said outfit and I'm minding my own business. And I'll talk to you about it if I want, maybe not. As for transgender, they will tell you, no, I am a woman. They will argue with you on reality, on biology, on language. And I think that's actually probably a good place to go from here. Speaking of over affirmation, excessive affirmation, I would say the hijacking of language is something that, I mean, it's not something that you can really have full control over, I suppose. Language is something that does evolve with the times, which is part of why it's been such a strong case for self-identification, and just, these people want to be addressed. They're asking you to address them in a way that they prefer. And that leads to, hey, you need to address them that way or you get fired from work, But I think one of the most effective battlegrounds that has been fought on, and again, I know those are fighting terms, but just for lack of better terms, one of the ways in which they've made a lot of ground has been in changing terms or telling kids. I say kids specifically because I know people now who were kids back, say, in 2016 when all this stuff was popping up. I was like, this is going to go away. This is too outlandish to become normal.
Boy, were you wrong.
Yeah, I know friends, like younger siblings and such. They were like 10, 12, whatever. Now they're like 18, teenagers. They're like, well, gender's a spectrum. And they will sit down and explain to you about how this doctor that they watched or what they were reading about in school, watching about on YouTube, or even in any mainstream form is explaining the complexity of gender and how sex is this vast thing to be explored. I'll say right now, and obviously this is partially an opinion, but I think a lot of it comes down to just expression, personality. People wanting to express themselves and their personality, and they cannot. We have created a culture that sort of rewards the maximum amount of labels that you can assign to yourself. It's called the Oppression Olympics.
There's also the intersectionality train as well.
Intersectionality.
Yeah, how many boxes can you check? You're gay, black, trans, poor, all the stuff.
Yeah, and it's allowed for us to live in this space in which everyone... Sorry, I just coughed there. Everyone sort of has to go along with, and actually I don't think it's necessarily that everyone has to go along with the way things are, but I think that we've sort of been led to think that way. Because I think especially for kids, their thought is, oh, this is normal. Like, to them, this is normal. There's not much pushback. And I would say that's where the right wing fails a lot. They have the mentality, oh, we've already lost. It's already over. We're going to just try and like have our little corner over here. And I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to, I guess for lack of better terms, defend your own land, live on your own island and such. But I think there are ways to fight back that are not quite combative. I guess the term would be combative. I think even being able to address the conversation in a way that's sort of like, hey, do you understand how this affects people with autism? And I'm not saying, oh, you're in a random argument and you just start talking about people with autism. It's situationally specific. I think that there are so many angles that you can come at this subject at, that there are options in how we can address both the individuals involved or just the situation we happen to be in. Because there are a ton of situations. I just did work training the other day where now it's considered part of the sexual harassment policy if you do not adhere to someone's preferred pronouns. And again, a way in which I would say that they have really won the language war or hustle. I'm trying not to use fighting terms quite as much, but this is the culture war,
It is. And I wanted to go back to something that you said. You kind of mentioned there are some people that they're like, if we just go off to our corner of land, and call it a day. And that really kind of struck a chord with me, because I see that on I'm going a bit more religious now, so I'm targeting a specific group of Christians where they kind of take the mentality of, if we just stay in the church, the church is a good place, there are a sect of Christians that are like, we don't need to engage the politics. The world is lost, blah, blah, blah. And I think to a certain extent, you're like, I don't want to use fighting terms. To a level, it's almost kind of necessary, because my argument is that you can try to stay in your own corner of land, but you're just delaying the inevitable. They're coming for you. That's what they've always been doing. They are coming. They are going to come for your kids, and if you step in the way, they're going to go after you. And so this idea of like, we're just going to just huddle up together, it's like, one, as Christians, that's ridiculous, because that goes against one of our core tenets of spreading the gospel. Okay, so you're being a bad Christian by doing that. But secondly, like, the church is supposed to have a level of outreach, and you're supposed to be able. That's the thing about the Bible, at least, is that a lot of people think it's a big set of rules. That's a very rudimentary way of looking at the Bible. There takes a lot of discernment looking at scripture. That's why we have Bible studies, is because there are things that are difficult to figure out. So as Christians, we should be able to critically think and then articulate ideas, like core fundamental ideas. And we don't have to use a ton of scripture to do it. Like, as you said, like, one of the things that Jesus did was he asked questions. It's like you said, okay, don't start off with autism. It's like, okay, well, have you ever considered that maybe some of these people that think they're transgender might be suffering from something else? Like, a pretty innocent question. And of course, they probably never thought, like, I never thought about that. But I did just want to touch on it because it's something that really does bother me about Christians.
And another thing that I would, and another thing I say that, I don't want to say this is the sort of thing where it's a running away with your tail between your legs thing. I think for a large part, most people on the right in general as well just sort of figured, we have this in the bag. And by that, I sort of just mean they didn't think that this was a problem worth addressing.
So ridiculous.
It seems so outlandish. But I believe part of the reason it got this far is because of what we're just talking about with people preferring to occupy their own space, which I think in itself is a good thing. But I think that creating culture is important because it's so prominent today, because our media, like, not just our media, like every way in which we participate with the world outside of our house, neighborhood, and church is the secular, quote unquote secular. It's all pop culture. Whatever is the most popular, that is what you and your family are going to be interacting with every day when you're not at one of the places you've already committed to being, where you feel the most safe. But when the people you care about are going more into the world, you need to not only be more prepared to do so, I genuinely think it's important to be able to have fun while doing it. And I think it's why Christians, for instance, have fallen behind in terms of creating culture. Like, they haven't put a ton of effort into creating media that's not just for Christians. But when Sound of Freedom came out, everyone just figured, granted, that movie was under attack before it even came out. It didn't even have anything to do with...
It was stalled for several years, wasn't it?
It was.
For 5 or 6 years. Yeah. Obviously, that movie was targeted before it came out. But the expectation was, because Christians are looking forward to seeing this movie, it's a Christian movie, it's not cool, no one wants to go see it now. Or we're going to try and, like, bomb it into the ground so that everyone thinks it's not cool to see it. Because Christians are just like, we're going to just have we're the ones.
It's not just that, though. It's like with Christians, the reason why Christian movies suck is because their view of the world is so weird. And the way that they write it is super weird.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? You're like, this is not how it actually happens.
A lot
like, it doesn't even look really realistic. Weird. Which shows, essentially what it shows, though, is that they just don't grasp like the sin of the world, if that makes sense. Like they've lived in this
Yeah.
bubble for so long that like they don't really know what it looks like to live in that
And
mindset.
it always has to be about the human condition as well. Like for Christians, they always see it. I say always, but they tend to see things from the perspective of, oh, it's us versus the world every day. But I think it would be successful to do something as simple as make a movie that doesn't have a million F-bombs and sex scenes, and just own being classy. You know,
Yeah.
like own being classy and create entertainment and enter situations in which you bring class, because that is attractive. That's something that there is a demand for across the board, because everything right now around us is degenerate. It perfectly leads into what I want to talk about next. I know we don't have a ton of time. I asked you this when we filmed this before. So tell me this. Is drag trans?
No.
It is not trans. However, why is it that in the media they're saying that the drag community is under attack because of the super mega MAGA Republicans who hate the trans community?
Well, it goes back.
They're saying
it goes back to the idea of the predators, people that want to be. Now, I'm not saying that all drag queens want to be with children, but the ones that want to be with children, like they can get access to them through those protected classes.
I think it's even more innocuous than that, and by that I mean, like, obviously there are the clips of like drag performers who have gone way too crazy with kids around. There's a major problem with that. There's a problem with the whole thing. However, I think the reason that that's even become even relatively comfortable, that's probably not the best word for it, is because the trans activists are able to go to the drag queens and be like, hey, you know those closed-minded Christians over there? They hate the fact that you're over here expressing yourself at midnight when they're going to sleep and getting ready for church in the morning. They can't just leave you alone. Why is it that they're coming after you? You know, they are trying to absorb the drag community and have very successfully enraged the general drag community. So they think Ron DeSanctimonious, as Trump likes to call him, that Ron DeSantis, who's doing an amazing job in Florida, is just trying to shut down every hint of rainbow that he can find anywhere, you know. But the reality is, drag queens are not trans. They're not, I mean, I presume they're not on hormones. They don't have gender dysphoria.
Like a crap ton of makeup.
And that's just one class of people who like put on that outfit to entertain in an adult way, because drag is adult performance. And so that's another position I think can be taken when approaching the issue, to where drag queens are angry because they're thinking, oh, the Republicans are coming after us. The Christians are coming after us. No, like, but it all gets muddied in this concept of the trans stuff, because you see the rainbow, you see the now we have the drag queens reading to kids in school. I saw recently you started creating culture and reading to kids in school. A normal, classy person coming in and just reading to kids.
Imagine
a
that.
normal
I think
book.
things like that are important.
Yeah.
Things like that are important. I think it makes a much bigger difference than people realize. I think there is a lot to be said for how even Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder and all of them, I know they're at very different points in their careers now. I think there really is something to how they made a splash back when they did blow up, when they were going and talking to people. And of course, and especially in Ben's case, it was, oh, Ben Shapiro destroys this blue-haired liberal, blah, blah,
Right.
blah. But the concept itself was what worked. It wasn't necessarily the fact that, oh, Ben Shapiro destroys. It's the fact that he was there talking to people, and what they were saying was so ridiculous, it was hilarious, and would go viral, and we would all laugh. And it was
Mockery matters.
It was like that for quite a while. Yeah, like you don't need a big budget. You don't need to be able to make movies or anything to make that kind of difference. You just need to go to where that stuff is happening. It can be as simple as asking people questions. I know there are a lot of people who have these channels, whether on YouTube or TikTok, where they're just asking random questions in the street. And obviously, it's sort of this rigged game where it's, you never know what well of knowledge people actually have. You can make a lot of people look stupid by asking them how many continents there are, or just asking them a series of questions they're not prepared for. But there really is something to being in quote unquote enemy territory and just being the one there with class and respect and knows how to talk to people. Because I guarantee you, if you're in a situation, okay, I say guarantee, I can't guarantee you anything. This isn't medical advice. But if you're in a situation that possibly makes you very uncomfortable, and maybe it is even someone who is, I don't know, like a radical feminist or someone who really buys into gender ideology, reacting is the worst thing that you can do with anyone, not just with that. In general, when you know someone is, lack of better terms, triggered by something, the logical thing to do isn't to give that person exactly what they're so scared of. Let them think that, oh, like we're constantly under attack. We can't just go anywhere and be left alone. That's not what, and I hate saying the media want you to think, but that's not what the media want you to think. It's not what society has been made to people think. They've been made to think you're always under attack. You're not safe. People are looking at you weird. They don't want to talk to you. They want to kill you. They want to throw you in a ditch. They want you to disappear. They think that trans people are just going to go away, but we're telling you we're here. And that's why it's important to be able to have the conversation, because there are so many layers to it. It typically doesn't need to go anywhere near as far as dismantling every single layer there is to the quote unquote trans stuff. It comes down to making connections and being able to have conversations. You don't have to be Matt Walsh, who does an amazing job because it is his job to draw attention to this subject and to really throw himself into the middle of this hornet's nest where he's always getting stung, but he can take it. It's what he's meant to do. It's what he's called to do. But you don't have to be a Matt Walsh in order to make a difference like that. Just being a person who can interact with other people, who can understand the multiple things that could be going on. The problem is that people aren't equipped with knowledge. We talked about in the Weird Wide Web, how I think a huge part of how everyone really fell behind and how 2020 really caught everyone off guard is because everyone's living their daily lives, and especially young people were more so on the internet. And the internet is now, as everyone is well aware, the public stage. And there's been this game of catch up for people who realize, wow, I really do need to be aware of this space, at least be able to be aware, have some semblance of what's going on. People have to work for a living. You go to work so that you can pay for where you go home to eat, be able to pay for your groceries and go to sleep so you can get up and work the next day. That's what people need to be worried about. But now there's this realization that, okay, if we really want to save our culture, if we want to be able to build connections, because things don't need to just keep dwindling the way they are, and I really don't believe they will. This is a very, very feeble movement, and I believe it's already falling apart. And I think just being aware, like being equipped with the knowledge, really puts anyone in a good position to address it.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think it's a good place to kind of end off, and I'll get your final thoughts here. But I feel like this episode, you did a good job. Like, it is about defining our terms. So it's about defining our terms. And I really think probably one of the more important things that you defined was transsexual, transgender, and was it called transgender? Yeah, which I think is actually very, very helpful. And then also talking about these other groups besides gender dysphoria that get lumped into, the transgender movement or gender ideology. See, I'm messing up the terms, but we're figuring out, right? And so there's that. And then the second thing, of course, is having the knowledge to then practice. And you might do a bad job in the beginning, but like practice having those conversations with people without immediately being like, well, what do you think about Dylan Mulvaney. You know, there's
Yep.
other ways to there's other ways to like enter into the conversation a little bit more stealthily. And I think that's something that has to happen.
I would add as well, I'm not going to turn it into a whole thing, but even talking to the people you know, like in your circle, you know, one, you don't know how informed the people around you are, and I'm not saying educate everyone around you. I'm just saying, like, this is casual conversation for people in the general public square. Being able to even talk to the people you know about the issue at hand. I talk to family members, especially older family members, like my father-in-law, for instance. I'm like, you know, this, and this is going on. And it'll either be like, what on earth is that? Or it'll be, oh, I heard of that. Isn't that crazy crap, you know? And being able to expose people to those ideas and just sort of learn to have casual conversations, just that alone can better prepare you. And even then, the next time that you encounter said scenario in probably a less ideal setting.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I think it'll be a good place for us to kind of end, but good informative stuff. I know that we don't know when, but I know we're going to have you back on for a very near and dear subject to my heart. TikTok. Which I'm very excited about. But for now, everyone will have to be happy with this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you're not subscribed, why aren't you subscribed? Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And you can listen to us where any podcasts are found, including Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. Man, it's like a roll, you know? Like I just feel it in me when I start doing it. I can't help it.
You got it done.
I know. John, thanks for coming on, and hopefully we will see you again soon.